September 1948. Salvatore Bonanno brought 6 shooters into Wells' restaurant, walked straight to Bumpy Johnson's table, called him the N-word in front of 40 people. Bumpy set his razor down, spoke 6 words. The room went silent. 3 days later, the 5 families stopped their war on Harlem. What did Bumpy Johnson say that scared the mafia more than bullets ever could? Harlem, 1948. Not the Harlem you've seen in movies, not all desperation and crumbling tenements. That version sells newspapers. This one made millionaires. 7th Avenue between 132nd and 133rd. Numbers runners in tailored suits. Musicians carrying instrument cases worth more than most men's cars. Police captains who knew better than to ask questions. City councilmen who came through the back door. Power didn't look like power here. It looked like Thursday night dinner. Wells' restaurant sat in the middle of it all. Not fancy. Clean tablecloths, decent lighting, kitchen that closed at 11 p.m. sharp. Owner was a man named Joseph Wells, according to the 1947 City Business Registry. Ran the place for 16 years without incident. The restaurant had one rule: unwritten, unspoken, absolute. Whatever blood you had on the street stayed on the street. You could hate a man outside those doors. You could plan to put him in the ground. But inside Wells' restaurant, you nodded. You ate. You kept your gun in your waistband. The place worked because everyone needed it to work. Musicians needed somewhere safe to negotiate contracts. Numbers runners needed neutral ground to settle disputes without gunfire. Police needed somewhere they could be seen without wearing a badge. Joseph Wells never enforced the rule. Didn't need to. The room enforced itself. Break the peace at Wells. You'd answer to everyone who needed that peace. Not just one crew. Every crew. Every player who depended on that one neutral square of Harlem staying neutral. That's power. Not the kind you buy with guns. The kind you build with consensus. September 1948. Thursday night. The restaurant was full. Not packed, but steady. Maybe 40 people spread across 12 tables. Conversations kept low. Silverware on porcelain. Louis Jordan on the jukebox in the corner. Stephanie St. Clair sat near the window, the woman who'd invented the numbers game in Harlem. 63 years old, still sharper than half the men in the room. She was there 3 nights a week. Always ordered the catfish. 2 tables over, a police sergeant named Daniel O'Keefe. Off duty, no uniform, eating pot roast like he wasn't collecting protection. Money from half the policy banks in the neighborhood. He was. Everyone knew. No one mentioned it. Near the back, 3 musicians from the Apollo, arranging a tour, negotiating splits. Voices low, pens moving across napkins with numbers and percentages. This wasn't a hideout. It was an ecosystem. It ran on unspoken agreements, mutual need, and one simple fact. Some places are more valuable alive than burned down. Wells' restaurant was one of those places, until 8:47 p.m. that Thursday, when someone decided the rules didn't apply to him. Table 7. Near the kitchen door. Not the best seat. Not the worst. Bumpy Johnson sat there every Thursday. Same chair. Back to the wall. Clear view of the entrance, the street-facing windows, the hallway to the restrooms. Not paranoia. Habit. He was 41 years old in September 1948. 5'9", 170 pounds. Clean-shaven. Suit pressed. Shoes shined. Wedding ring on his left hand. His wife, Mamie, sat across from him. She came most Thursdays. Ordered light. Watched the room more than she ate. She wasn't decoration. She was a second set of eyes. A warning system with a smile. Bumpy ate slow. Knife and fork, not fingers. No rushing. No looking around. He watched the room by watching nothing at all. Peripheral vision. Body language. The rhythm of voices. You didn't call him a kingpin in 1948. That word came later, from crime reporters who needed drama. In Harlem, people called him Bumpy, or Mr. Johnson if they didn't know him, or nothing at all if they were smart. His power wasn't loud. It was structural. He controlled the numbers racket in Harlem. Not alone. He'd inherited pieces from Stephanie St. Clair when the Italian mafia tried to muscle in during the 1930s. She'd fought them off for years, used legal warfare, public exposure, sheer will. Then she brought in Bumpy to handle the part that couldn't be settled in court. By 1948, Bumpy ran policy banks, enforced collections, mediated disputes between runners. He didn't take territory by force. He took it by proving he could hold it. You want protection? You paid Bumpy. You want to operate without interference? You paid Bumpy. You want someone to guarantee the cops wouldn't raid your spot every week? You paid Bumpy. The service was real. The protection worked. That's why it lasted. He wasn't universally loved. Power never is. But he was universally respected. And in Harlem, respect bought more than fear ever could. That Thursday night, Bumpy was eating fried chicken. Mamie was working through a salad. They weren't talking much. Didn't need to. 17 years married. Comfortable silence. He'd just put his fork down when the door opened. 7 men. Italian, well-dressed, not trying to blend in. The room noticed. Conversations didn't stop, but they slowed. Eyes tracked without staring. Everyone knew what 7 Italians in Wells' restaurant meant. It meant someone was about to test the room's neutrality. Bumpy noticed. Didn't react. Picked his fork back up. Took another bite. Mamie's hand moved to her napkin. Slow. Casual. But her fingers stayed on the edge of the table. Ready. The man leading the group was Salvatore Bonanno, not Joe Bonanno's son. People confused them later. This was a distant cousin, a soldier working his way up through the ranks of the Bonanno crime family. Based in Brooklyn, controlled labor rackets, loan sharking, extortion. He'd been sent to Harlem with a message. Records from the late 1940s, police reports, federal investigations into organized crime, suggest the 5 families had been trying to absorb Harlem's numbers racket for years. Not violently. Not yet. They'd tried financial pressure first. Buy out the competition, offer partnerships, make the takeover look voluntary. Bumpy had said no. Every time, so they sent Salvatore Bonanno with a different kind of offer, the kind backed by 6 armed men. He walked straight to table 7. Didn't ask permission. Didn't wait to be acknowledged. Just stopped at the edge of Bumpy's table and stood there. The room kept moving. Forks still scraped plates. The jukebox still played. But everyone was listening now. Bumpy looked up. Slow. Didn't stand. Didn't speak. Salvatore Bonanno smiled. Not friendly. The kind of smile you give someone when you think the fight's already over. He had no idea what was about to happen. Neither did anyone else in that room. But in 3 minutes, the balance of power in Harlem would shift. Not through violence. Not through negotiation. Through 6 words that would make the Italian mafia rethink everything they thought they knew about control. Those who were there that night. Witnesses questioned years later by federal investigators. People who never went on record but told the story privately. All remembered the same thing. Bumpy Johnson never raised his voice. Never reached for his razor. Never stood up. He just spoke. Quietly. Precisely. 6 words, and Salvatore Bonanno walked out. No official transcript of that night exists. What follows is reconstructed from witness accounts given years later, some to federal investigators, some to family members, some never officially recorded. The exact words may be lost to time. The feeling in that room is not. Salvatore Bonanno didn't knock, didn't ask permission. He just walked. The door to Wells' restaurant swung open. 7 men. Italian, well-dressed. Expensive suits that didn't try to hide what they were. These weren't businessmen. They were soldiers dressed like businessmen. 6 of them spread out. Not military formation. Just placement. Strategic. corners. Exits, lines of sight, hands loose at their sides. Ready. They didn't pull weapons. Didn't need to. The message was in their bodies, in the spacing, in the confidence of men who'd walked into hostile rooms before and walked out alive. The jukebox kept playing. Louis Jordan. Caledonia. Someone's fork scraped porcelain. A woman near the window laughed, nervous but trying not to show it. Life continued, but underneath everyone was measuring, calculating, preparing. Salvatore Bonanno stopped at table 7. He looked down at Bumpy Johnson the way a man looks at something he's about to buy, assessing value, checking for defects. Already counting the cost, Bumpy kept chewing, didn't look up. Not yet. Just worked through his bite of fried chicken like a man who had all the time in the world. Mamie's hand stayed on her napkin. Her eyes stayed on Salvatore. Not afraid, not hostile, just watching. The way you watch a snake when you're not sure if it's about to strike. 5 seconds passed. 10. 15. The room pretended not to notice. Forks kept moving. Conversations continued. But every ear was locked on table 7. Every peripheral vision trained on the man standing over Bumpy Johnson's dinner. Finally, Bumpy swallowed, set his fork down, picked up his napkin, wiped his mouth. Slow. Methodical. Like he was alone in his own kitchen. Then he looked up. "Mr. Johnson," Salvatore's voice carried. Not shouting, just projected. Loud enough for the room to hear. Loud enough to establish dominance. "We need to talk." Bumpy's expression didn't change. "We're eating." 3 words. Flat. No emotion. No hostility. Just stating fact. Salvatore smiled. The kind of smile you give when you think the game's already over. "This won't take long. Just business. Just a conversation." Business happens outside. Not tonight. The room shifted. Subtle. A fork stopped halfway to a mouth. A conversation dropped in volume. A chair scraped as someone adjusted their position. Everyone was listening now, not pretending anymore. Salvatore leaned forward, placed his hands on the table. Not aggressive, casual, like he was talking to an old friend, like he owned the space. "The 5 families have been patient with you. You know that." His voice was measured, reasonable. "We've made offers, fair offers, good money, partnership, but you keep saying no." Bumpy said nothing, just waited. "That stops tonight." Salvatore let that sit, let it breathe. "This isn't an offer anymore. This is how things are going to be." Bumpy picked up his water glass, took a sip, set it down. "I'm not interested. You don't understand." Salvatore's smile widened. "This isn't about interest. This is about reality. You work with us, or you don't work. Period." Still no reaction from Bumpy. Just that same flat stare. The kind that doesn't threaten because it doesn't need to. The kind that makes men uncomfortable because they can't read it. Salvatore straightened up, glanced around the room, making sure his audience was paying attention, making sure everyone understood the power dynamic he thought he was establishing. "Harlem's changing. The war's over. The old ways are done. You can change with it, or you can get buried under it." He spread his hands. "Your choice." Bumpy set his napkin down, pushed his plate forward an inch. "You done?" Salvatore's smile cracked. Just slightly, just enough to show the frustration underneath. "You think you're untouchable?" His voice rose. Not much, but enough. "You think because you run a few policy banks in Harlem, you're a king?" The word hung in the air. "King," said with contempt, said like an insult. The room went quieter, not silent, just listening harder. "You're nothing." Salvatore's voice was steady now, cold. "A street thug who got lucky. A numbers runner who thinks he's something more. But luck runs out. You understand that?" Nobody called Bumpy Johnson nothing. Not in Harlem. Not in Wells' restaurant. Not in any room where people understood how power actually worked. Stephanie St. Clair's fork stopped moving. Daniel O'Keefe, the police sergeant 2 tables over, set his knife down. The 3 musicians in the back went silent. Salvatore didn't notice, or didn't care. Here's what's going to happen. He leaned in again. Closer this time, voice dropping. You're going to take our offer. 50-50 split on the numbers. We handle distribution, protection, political connections. You handle collection, clean, simple. Everybody profits. Bumpy still didn't speak, just watched, like he was studying something under glass, something interesting but ultimately insignificant. Salvatore's jaw tightened. You hearing me? I hear you. Then what's your answer? No. One word, flat, final. Salvatore's hands curled into fists on the table. His 6 men shifted. Subtle movements, hands drifting toward waistbands, toward jacket pockets where weight hung heavy. The temperature in the room changed, not literally, but everyone felt it. That moment before violence, that breath before the explosion. Then Salvatore made his mistake. He leaned in close. Close enough that only Bumpy and Mamie could hear. At least that's what he thought. But the room had gone so quiet that when he said it, when he called Bumpy Johnson the N-word, everyone heard. Not shouted, almost conversational, like it was just another word, just another tool to establish dominance. The room didn't gasp, didn't react. It just stopped. Every fork froze. Every conversation died. Even the jukebox seemed to drop in volume, though Louis Jordan kept singing. 40 people, 40 witnesses, all locked on table 7. Mamie's hand moved from her napkin, slid toward her purse, smooth, practiced, like she'd done it 1,000 times. Bumpy's hand shot out, touched her wrist. Light pressure, a message without words. Not yet. Not here. Not like this. Salvatore was still smiling, still thought he'd landed a blow, still thought intimidation was working, still thought this was going the way he'd planned. He had no idea what he'd just done. Bumpy Johnson didn't stand up, didn't raise his voice, didn't reach for the straight razor everyone knew he carried in his inside jacket pocket. He just leaned back in his chair, slow, relaxed, like a man settling in for a long, comfortable conversation. Then he spoke. 6 words. Quiet. Cold. Surgical. There's 40 people in this room. That's all he said. No threat. No insult. No anger. Just a statement of observable fact. Salvatore blinked. Confused. So, what's that supposed to mean? Bumpy didn't answer. Didn't need to. Because the room answered for him. Stephanie St. Clair stood up. Didn't say anything. Didn't make a sound. Just stood. Watching, her fork still in her hand. Daniel O'Keefe pushed his plate away, turned his chair, faced table 7, his off-duty weapon suddenly visible under his jacket. The 3 musicians set their pens down. One of them cracked his knuckles. Not threatening, not aggressive, just ready. Then the waiter near the kitchen stopped moving. Then a woman at the window put down her glass. Then a man in a corner stood up. One by one, like dominoes falling in slow motion, every single person in Wells' restaurant stopped what they were doing. They didn't draw weapons, didn't raise fists, didn't say a word. They just turned and looked at Salvatore Bonanno and his 6 men. 40 people, 40 pairs of eyes, 40 witnesses who'd just watched a man break the one rule that kept Harlem from tearing itself apart. Salvatore's smile disappeared. He looked around the room, saw faces he didn't recognize, saw bodies he couldn't control, saw a power structure he hadn't calculated, hadn't prepared for, hadn't even considered. His 6 men shifted. Hands moved toward waistbands, toward jacket pockets, toward the weapons they'd brought precisely for this scenario. Don't. Bumpy's voice, still quiet, still calm. You won't make it to the door. Salvatore looked at him. Really looked. And for the first time that night, maybe the first time in years, he understood that he'd miscalculated. This wasn't Bumpy Johnson's restaurant. This wasn't Bumpy Johnson's table. This wasn't even Bumpy Johnson's protection. This was Harlem's room, and Harlem had just chosen a side. Salvatore's hand moved away from his waistband. He straightened his jacket, cleared his throat, tried to salvage some dignity from a situation that had turned completely upside down in the space of 6 words. "This isn't over," he said, voice steady, professional, like he was ending a business meeting that hadn't gone his way. Bumpy picked up his fork, cut into his chicken. "Yes, it is." Salvatore Bonanno turned, walked toward the door. His 6 men followed, slowly, carefully, hands visible. No sudden movements. Nobody stopped them. Nobody touched them. Nobody said a word. They just watched. 40 people, silent, united, immovable. The door opened, closed. The jukebox played. Someone coughed. A fork clinked against a plate. Conversations resumed. Quiet at first, then gradually louder. Life returning to normal. Bumpy Johnson finished his chicken. Mamie picked up her fork, went back to her salad. Like nothing had happened. Like they hadn't just ended a war. What was said in that back room was never recorded. No official minutes. No transcripts. No wiretaps. But word leaked. It always does. Stories spread through the underworld the way rumors spread through Harlem. Quietly, persistently, until everyone knows. Former associates decades later described what they'd been told happened that night. This is what survived. The walk from Wells' restaurant to the street took 12 seconds. Salvatore Bonanno didn't run, didn't rush, just moved with purpose. His 6 men followed. Professional. Controlled. Like soldiers retreating from bad terrain with their dignity barely intact. Nobody followed them out. Nobody needed to. The message had been delivered. Not with bullets. Not with threats. With something far more dangerous. Unity. By 9:15 p.m., Salvatore was in a car heading back to Brooklyn. His hands weren't shaking, but they should have been. He'd just looked into the face of something he didn't understand, something his training hadn't prepared him for. By 9:30 p.m., he was making phone calls. By 10 p.m., the 5 families knew. The meeting happened at a social club on Mulberry Street, Little Italy, a place where deals got made and problems got solved, usually permanently. Frank Costello arrived first, the Prime Minister of the underworld, the man who'd negotiated with senators, judges, union bosses. The man who understood power better than anyone else in organized crime because he understood that power wasn't always about killing. Sometimes it was about knowing when not to. Joe Bonanno came next, head of one of the 5 families, Salvatore's distant cousin, the man who'd authorized the Harlem expansion in the first place. Old school, traditional, used to getting what he wanted. Albert Anastasia arrived last, the Lord High Executioner, the man who'd killed more people than most men had met, the man who didn't negotiate because he'd never needed to. Violence had always been enough, until maybe tonight. They sat in the back room. Espresso. Cigars. Low voices, the kind of room where careers ended and bodies got planned for. Salvatore told them what happened, every detail. The restaurant, the 40 people, the 6 words, the silence, the walk out. When he finished, nobody spoke for a long time. Frank Costello lit a cigar, took a long pull, exhaled slowly. "Tell me again what he said." "There's 40 people in this room." Salvatore's voice was steady, professional. But there was something underneath, something that hadn't been there before. "That's all. 6 words. And then?" They all stood up, Every single person in that restaurant just stood up, watching us. Waiting. Albert Anastasia leaned back in his chair. So we kill him. Problem solved. Send a message. Nobody disrespects the 5 families and lives. Frank Costello shook his head. You don't understand. What's to understand? Anastasia's voice rose. He embarrassed us. We make an example. That's how this works. That's how this used to work. Costello leaned forward. What Bumpy Johnson did tonight, he didn't threaten us. He showed us something we didn't see. Which is numbers. Joe Bonanno cut in. We have numbers. We have more men than, not soldiers. Costello interrupted. People, community, loyalty that we can't buy or threaten or kill our way past. Silence. Costello continued. You want to take a neighborhood with guns, you have to hold it with guns. Forever. Every street corner, every shop, every apartment building, every single day. He paused. Let that sink in. Harlem's not a neighborhood. It's a city. 30,000 people, maybe more. You want to occupy 30,000 people who don't want you there? We've done it before, Anastasia said. Where? Show me. Costello's voice was cold now, hard. Show me one neighborhood we've held where the people actively resisted, where every resident, every business owner, every cop on the beat was working against us. Nobody answered. I'll tell you what happens. Costello stubbed out his cigar. We send 50 men. They send 100. We send 100. They send 200. Not soldiers, just people. Shopkeepers, musicians, waiters, every person who depends on that neighborhood staying independent. So we kill them all, Anastasia said, but his voice had less conviction now. You want to kill 30,000 people? 40,000? Where does it stop? Costello spread his hands. And even if you could, even if you killed every person who stood against you, what would you have? A graveyard. Burned-out buildings. No numbers game. No profit. No point. Joe Bonanno leaned back, processing. So what are you saying? I'm saying Bumpy Johnson showed us the math, and the math doesn't work in our favor. Costello's voice softened, became almost educational. 40 people in that room. They all stood with him, not because he paid them, not because he threatened them, because they chose him. You understand what that means? They're loyal, Salvatore said quietly. More than loyal. They're invested. Harlem with Bumpy Johnson is better than Harlem without him. They've made that calculation, and we can't compete with that. We could... Anastasia started. No. Costello's voice was final. We can't, because every dollar we spend trying to take Harlem, Bumpy spends 0 defending it. His defense is built in. It's cultural. It's communal. We're fighting an army that doesn't need paychecks. The room went silent again. Joe Bonanno lit a cigarette. I've never backed down from a fight. This isn't backing down. This is being smart. Costello looked at each man in turn. We thought Harlem was territory. It's not. It's a country. And Bumpy Johnson's not a gangster. He's a head of state. You don't invade countries unless you can hold them, and we can't hold Harlem. So we just give up? Anastasia's voice dripped with contempt. No, we negotiate. Real negotiation. Trade, borders, mutual respect. The things countries do when war costs more than peace. Joe Bonanno crushed out his cigarette. They'll see it as weakness. Let them. We'll see it as profit. Costello stood up. The war for Harlem would cost us millions, hundreds of men. Political capital. Police cooperation. Maybe even federal attention. For what? A numbers racket that makes a few 100,000 a year? It's principle, Anastasia said. Principle doesn't pay dividends. Costello walked to the door, stopped, turned. Bumpy Johnson taught us something tonight. You can't take what people won't give. You can try. But it'll cost more than it's worth. He left. The room sat in silence. Finally, Salvatore Bonanno spoke. He didn't threaten us. That's what I keep thinking about. He didn't say, "I'll kill you," or "My men will get you." He just said there were 40 people in the room. That's it. And somehow, that was more terrifying than any threat. Because it was true, Joe Bonanno said quietly. And we didn't have an answer for it. Albert Anastasia stood up, paced, stopped. "You're really saying we negotiate? With a numbers runner from Harlem?" "I'm saying we don't have a choice," Joe Bonanno said. "Not a good one anyway." The meeting lasted another hour. Arguments, counter-arguments, plans proposed and discarded. But by midnight, the decision was made. The 5 families would pull back from Harlem, not completely, not forever, but for now. No more forced takeovers, no more soldiers walking into restaurants, no more public confrontations. If they wanted a piece of Harlem's economy, they'd negotiate, trade, compromise. Things they weren't used to doing, things they'd spent decades avoiding. Things Bumpy Johnson had forced them to learn in 6 words. By 1 a.m., word had spread through Harlem. Not official announcements, not newspaper headlines. Just whispers, the way news travels when the stakes are high and the walls have ears. Bumpy Johnson had faced down the Italian mafia. No guns. No blood. No bodies, just 6 words. There's 40 people in this room. By morning, every policy bank knew. By the end of the week, every numbers runner in Brooklyn knew. By the end of the month, every organized crime family on the East Coast knew. Harlem wasn't for sale, wasn't for taking, wasn't for conquering. Because you can't conquer people who've already decided who they belong to. And Harlem belonged to itself. Bumpy Johnson had just reminded everyone of that fact. The 5 families never tried to take Harlem by force again. They sent negotiators instead. They offered partnerships, trade agreements, respect. And Bumpy Johnson? He went back to Wells' restaurant the next Thursday. Same table, same chair, same fried chicken. Like nothing had happened. Because in his world, nothing had. He'd just taught the most powerful criminal organization in America a lesson they should have already known. Respect isn't taken, it's earned. 1 word at a time. Friday morning, September 1948. Harlem woke up the way it always did. Vendors opening shops, kids walking to school, numbers runners collecting yesterday's bets, the same rhythm, the same streets. But something had changed. You couldn't see it, couldn't touch it, but everyone felt it. Word travels fast in Harlem, faster than newspapers, faster than radio, whispers in barbershops, conversations in corner stores. A story passed from one person to another until the whole neighborhood knew. Bumpy Johnson had stood down the Italian mafia. No guns, no blood, just 6 words. By noon, the story had spread to Brooklyn. By evening, the Bronx knew. By Sunday, every organized crime outfit on the East Coast had heard some version of what happened at Wells' restaurant. Most of the versions were wrong. Some said Bumpy pulled a gun. Some said he had 50 men waiting outside. Some said Stephanie St. Clair threatened to expose the mafia's political connections. None of that happened. But the truth was somehow more powerful than any fiction. Because the truth was simple. Harlem chose Bumpy Johnson, and when a whole neighborhood chooses you, no army can move you. The 5 families understood that, eventually. Frank Costello made the call himself, 3 days after the confrontation. Reached out through intermediaries, neutral parties, people who could talk to both sides without bringing guns to the table. The message was simple. We want to talk. Not demands. Not threats. An actual conversation. Bumpy took the meeting, not at Wells' restaurant, not in Harlem. Neutral ground, a hotel in Midtown Manhattan, private room. No weapons, just two men and a table. Costello didn't apologize. Men like him don't apologize. But he acknowledged. What happened at Wells was unfortunate. Bumpy said nothing, just waited. Costello continued. Salvatore acted without authorization. The things he said, those don't represent the families. But they represent what you think. Costello paused, chose his words carefully. They represent what we thought. Past tense. And now? Now we understand that Harlem operates differently. We respect that. Bumpy leaned back in his chair, same posture he'd had at Wells' restaurant. Relaxed. In control. Respect is a start. What else? A proposal. We stay out of the numbers racket in Harlem, completely. No interference, no muscle, no competition. In exchange for what? Safe passage. Our trucks move through Harlem without trouble. Our people can operate businesses, legal businesses, without harassment. Trade, not occupation. Bumpy considered this. And if someone on your side forgets the agreement? We handle it internally. You have my word. Your word. Bumpy let that hang in the air. The same word that sent Salvatore Bonanno into my neighborhood with 6 men? Costello didn't flinch. That was a mistake. It won't happen again. How do I know? Because we're businessmen, Mr. Johnson, and bad business costs money. War costs money. Occupation costs money. What you showed us at Wells, that taught us something valuable. He leaned forward. You can't hold territory where the people don't want you. Not permanently. We can send 100 men into Harlem, 1,000. But every shop owner, every resident, every person on every corner would resist. Quietly. Slowly. Until we're bleeding money and manpower for a prize that's not worth the cost. Bumpy said nothing, just listened. You've built something we can't buy, can't take, can't replicate. Costello spread his hands. So we're not going to try. We're going to do what smart businessmen do. We're going to trade. Silence filled the room. Then Bumpy spoke. One condition. Name it. No one in my neighborhood gets disrespected. Not by your people. Not by anyone connected to you. Someone crosses that line, the deal's off. Costello nodded. Agreed. They shook hands. No contract, no lawyers, no witnesses. Just 2 men who understood that power works differently when it's built on loyalty instead of fear. The agreement held. Within a week, the Italian mafia pulled back from Harlem. Numbers games ran without interference. Policy banks operated without raids. The harassment stopped. Not because the 5 families suddenly became benevolent, because they'd done the math. Holding Harlem by force would cost more than it was worth. Negotiating with Bumpy Johnson cost nothing. Other neighborhoods noticed. In Brooklyn, local operators started asking questions. If Harlem can negotiate, why can't we? In the Bronx, numbers runners started organizing, building networks, creating the kind of community structure that made occupation expensive. Bumpy Johnson had accidentally started something bigger than himself. He'd shown that organized crime wasn't just about organization, it was about community. And communities are harder to break than gangs. The police noticed too. Daniel O'Keefe, the sergeant who'd been eating pot roast at Wells' restaurant that night, filed a report. Not official, just observations. Internal memo that made its way up the chain. The report said something interesting. Johnson maintains order more effectively than traditional law enforcement. Numbers violations continue, but violent crime in his territory has decreased by an estimated 30% over the past 2 years. Residents report feeling safer. Businesses operate without fear of random violence. The report never led to any action. The NYPD wasn't about to officially endorse a criminal operation, but it did change how they approached Harlem. Fewer raids, more cooperation. Quiet understanding that sometimes the devil you know is better than chaos you don't. Bumpy didn't become a hero. He was still a criminal. still ran illegal gambling, still operated outside the law. But he'd proven something important. Power doesn't always come from the barrel of a gun. Sometimes it comes from the quiet agreement of ordinary people who decide you're worth defending. The story could have ended there. Quiet victory, negotiated peace, Bumpy Johnson continuing to run Harlem the way he always had. But history doesn't work that cleanly. By 1952, Bumpy was arrested on drug charges, served time, got out, went back in. The cycle continued for years. The numbers game eventually got absorbed by state lotteries. Legal gambling replaced illegal operations. The power structure that Bumpy had built slowly eroded. He died in 1968. Heart attack. Wells Restaurant, the place where he'd ended a war with 6 words, closed in 1971. The neighborhood changed, Harlem changed, the whole world changed. But the lesson remained. In September 1948, a man sat at a table in a restaurant and proved that violence isn't the only form of power, that sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't a gun. It's a room full of people who've decided they're with you. Salvatore Bonanno never returned to Harlem. Not once. He rose through the ranks of the Bonanno family, made his money, lived his life. But he never forgot what happened at Wells Restaurant. Years later, according to federal testimony during organized crime investigations in the 1960s, Salvatore gave advice to younger mobsters. You can take a neighborhood by force, but you can't hold it if the people don't want you there. Learn that early, or learn it the hard way. He'd learned it the hard way. The 5 families kept their agreement with Harlem. Mostly. There were incidents, small violations, but nothing like the open warfare that had threatened to erupt in 1948, because both sides remembered what happened when someone forgot the rules. 40 people in a room. 40 people who stood up without being asked. 40 people who made a choice. That's not a gang. That's not a mob. That's a community. And you can't conquer a community, not with guns, not with threats, not with money. You can only negotiate with it. Or you can leave. Wells Restaurant is gone now. The building was torn down in 1973, replaced by an apartment complex. Most people who live there don't know what happened in September 1948, but some do. Old-timers, people who remember, people who were there or whose parents were there or who heard the story passed down through generations. They remember the night Bumpy Johnson ended a war without firing a shot. They remember 6 words that scared the Italian mafia more than any weapon ever could. They remember what it looked like when a whole room stood up, silently, powerfully, definitively, and said, "Not here, not us, not ever." That's the story they tell. Not about gangsters, not about crime, but about something older and more fundamental. The power of people who refuse to be conquered. The kind of power that doesn't need bullets, just loyalty, just presence, just the quiet agreement that some things are worth defending. Even in a room where nobody was supposed to fight. Especially in a room where nobody was supposed to fight. Because the real power wasn't in Bumpy Johnson's hands that night. It was in the 40 people who stood with him, and that kind of power doesn't die. It just waits. For the next time someone forgets how it works. The razor stayed in Bumpy's pocket, untouched, unused, unnecessary. Salvatore Bonanno walked out of Wells Restaurant that night with 6 armed men. None of them fired a shot. Within 72 hours, the 5 families stopped their war on Harlem. The agreement held for decades, not because of weapons, because 40 people in a room proved something the mafia hadn't calculated. Loyalty they couldn't buy, couldn't break, couldn't conquer. Wells Restaurant closed in 1971. The building's gone. Most witnesses are dead, but the file remains. If you want more stories the history books left out, hit subscribe. We uncover what time tried to bury. One question stays. What kind of power makes armed men leave in silence?